Well, I've actually always had sort of a predilection toward writing, creative writing, especially fiction, all throughout school. And I've always loved romance novels, but actually to like do any sort of a long novel type thing came completely provoked. I was actually challenged by my ex-husband. He had these really highfalutin ideas about what the demands of true literature were, and so he would mock me all the time for my, trashy choices in book reading. And so I sort of challenged him and said, you should read one time. And he essentially just said, I will absolutely never read a romance novel. You're insane. But, I held true to the don't knock until you tried it. So I said, if I wrote one, would you read it? So it started off sort of as a joke where I was just writing chapters sort of formulaically, how they go. Not with any real intention, but I super got into it. And then he was getting into it, and it became this, it just kind of took on a life of its own. And that's how my first novel got written. I went to Roosevelt School of the Arts here in Fresno, and then when I graduated there, I went to the Pacific Conservatory of the Performing Arts, in order to pursue an acting career, acting and dance theater career. After about 3 years in Hollywood pursuing that, I decided to come back to Fresno to pursue actually a greater degree. I actually feel like that background really served me in writing my book, because without really having too much experience in creative writing necessarily, I had a lot of experience in set dressing and scenes and playwriting and reading plays and acting characters and all that stuff. So I was able to put a lot of those aspects and those elements into the story in a way that I think really worked. The best way that I can think of, and the most feedback that I've gotten in that respect, has been that there is a lot of humor, and there's a lot of humanity. So I don't write traditional heroines that you would expect, who are very weak and waiting for the men to save them. I write heroines who, for the most part, are pretty brave and strong, and then men who are too. So it's more of a contemporary take on how, because life probably wouldn't have been that way back then. Right. Some people have called my characters sort of bratty because it wouldn't fit in the era that I'm writing, but it really translates well to a contemporary audience to have a stronger female voice. You know what, that's a good question. I wonder. I think there is. I think there is inspiration for romance everywhere, but I'm also a horrible romantic, so that could just be personality type. But I think that there's a lot of tradition here. There's a lot of really interesting culture in Fresno, including some culture that has evolved. If you look at the theater scene, which I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, it has really been something that has grown phenomenally, exponentially in the last few years, where we went from having pretty much just, one exclusive theater company that was like the Prime, with a smaller company that was also owned by the same person, to something where now we've expanded. We have at least, 10 really strong theater companies that are doing some great cultural work in town, and to me that's a romantic, exciting time. Oh, I have. I've read all 3 of them, and I found them wildly entertaining, but wildly is the word, and they are, in my opinion, really outside of the realm of what a typical romance novel is. It's erotica, and I don't mind calling it that, and I don't have a problem with that. Anais Nin is an erotic writer who I think is phenomenal. She writes beautiful, poetic erotica, so there's no problem with that, but it's not a romance novel. The sexual chemistry is important, but the chemistry is more important than the act, 9 times out of 10 in the books that I read and write. There is always, both of my novels so far, and this has only been sort of by accident that it's happened that way, but they've had like one graphic sex scene or whatever that's actually, lived through. For the most part, if there's any other sex, it's referred to, or it's just the tension that they have, the build-up, the attraction that they're fighting or whatever. That's what gets us. That's what makes us go, when are they going to admit their love? That's what you get involved in as the reader. Actually, the sex portions of it are usually something that just sort of happens as a byproduct. Yeah. Absolutely not. It's funny now to think about how what a joke it almost was to me, and now how serious I take it. I mean, I've been so excited by this whole process. I mean, when it was first getting sold in expanding markets, you start out in the United States, then it goes to Canada, and then, Europe, I think, is next. And so as it was expanding markets, I just got a thrill every time someone in Tokyo, wrote a review, and I'm going, what? It's spectacular to imagine. It's still, of course, not New York Times bestseller by any means, but it just really, you get a kick out of it. It's a lot of fun to see things like that, just to imagine that somebody in Japan is holding a copy of my book.